I've heard it said, and I think it's true, that poverty is more than a lack of money. It's a lack of connections. It's a lack of knowing the pathways and how you get from here to there. I became aware of the Maine Women's Lobby because I was on AFDC. I have 4 now grown children, 3 of whom have Tourette syndrome and related conditions, and another one who had acute intermittent porphyria. What that does is cause her to have, or she hasn't had in years, but can cause her to have toxic attacks. So I had children who needed a lot of care, a lot of maintenance, and that was during the Reagan administration years when I began that journey. Their father wasn't able to help me support them. He's a disabled American vet. And those were during the years when people who were on welfare really started getting a kicking, if they hadn't before. You know, that we were what was wrong with the country. And that was true even in my personal circle, so I really felt the onus. I really felt the shame and disgrace, but there wasn't anything else I could do. I wasn't trained to go make a decent living. I had no education, so I was on AFDC, and I kept trying to go out and work. I really didn't know what to do for work. I'd go to some pizza place, and I would spend all my money on childcare. I thought, well, I guess we're just going to be incredibly impoverished, but they're going to have me. And my first contact with the Maine Women's Policy Center is one day I got a questionnaire in the mail, and I was mad, you know, another nosy question. Who's asking me what now? Isn't life hard enough without these people getting up my, you know? And I looked at it, and this was the first questionnaire I had ever seen that seemed to understand that I was struggling, that I wasn't on welfare because I thought it was fun. And it just asked me, really, how are you really living? What are you really doing? How are you actually making ends meet? What do you do for... And I was only too glad to answer that questionnaire at length. And I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I, you know, mailed it with a vengeance. And I had no idea who these people were. And I told them how I really lived, that, you know, I worked under the table, that I, you know, paid other people as poor as me to watch my kids while I raked blueberries, and it was the only way I could get them any school clothes at all, even cheap ones. And, you know, I told them about illegal meat in my freezer, and, you know, all the underground economy that actually kept us afloat. So we were struggling very, very hard. And the other thing is that we were angry, because not only were we struggling, we were getting the back of society's hands for our efforts. So for someone to ask us from our own viewpoint what was happening to us was very moving. My family really wasn't ready for me to go do anything else, but the pressure became on. I'm trying to remember about what year, 95 or 96, that those of us on AFDC had better get on the stick and do something about ourselves, or the government was going to let us starve. Then I found out that those of us that were going to college on AFDC weren't going to be allowed to do it anymore. Well, the next thing I knew, my social worker was asking me if I wanted to sign up for something called Parents as Scholars. I didn't realize that it was that or get out of college. I really kind of didn't get the point until later on. Meanwhile, the Policy Center had gone to bat for us, and we were having Parents as Scholars. So I was in the early days, I was one of the pioneers of the Parents as Scholars program. The year I was graduating, that youngest daughter was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor, which is just what she needed. She was an absolute mess. She ended up having to be out of school, and we called it the 4 Doctors a Day program. She ultimately had a surgery to get the tumor out. My mother died. My daughter had this brain surgery, and my oldest daughter had her youngest child and developed postpartum psychosis. And through all that, I just went to school, and I'm going to have a degree by the end of this spring, even if I can't speak the day I get it. So there I was, you know, sort of emerging out of this horrible winter, semi-sane, and finding out that I was a law student in the following fall. So I went in, and law school came at me like a freight train, and the next thing I knew I had graduated. Laura Fortman was directing at that time, and we were trying to think of a good project for me to do to kickstart this thing off. And so what I spent the summer doing, I did 2 things. I wrote a position paper for use before the legislature about having guns taken away from people at the temporary stage of a PFA, of a protection from abuse order. The first 24 hours after a protection from abuse order comes out, we've all seen over and over and over again, is that critical window when they shouldn't be having access to guns. That's when people get gunned down in parking lots. And I put out a booklet which explains sort of underutilized laws that were helpful for victims of violence and domestic violence. And I spent the summer on that project, and they paid me for it, and it was really fun and interesting, and I hope something worthy of Linda's honor. My heart's in policy, so I'm not sure where I'll go as a lawyer, what I'll end up doing. I'm just beginning, I've only been doing this 9 months.